Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from Group 1 and for today we're going to present the answer for question 1. And my group consists of me, Ungku Anissa Safia, Muhammad Sulaiman and Naki Yudin. So, the question is, briefly discuss whether the acceptance of an offer is valid if it is qualified by such words as subject to contract or subject to a formal contract being drawn up by solicitors. Then support your answers with decided cases and provisions in the Contract Act 1950. Okay, so according to Section 2B Contract Act 1950, when the person to whom the proposal is made signifies his assent, therefore, the proposal is said to be accepted. A proposal, when accepted, becomes a promise. So this section stipulates that if an offer is made by the offerer and the offeree accept or agree the offer, there is acceptance to such offer. Next, we can take a look to Section 7A, where acceptance that was made must be absolute and qualified. Absolute and unqualified means that the acceptance must be made without any condition or qualification. It must be made exactly on the same terms of the offer without any modification. For Section 7B, acceptance must be expressed in a usual and reasonable manner, where if there is a mode of acceptance prescribed by the offerer, it must be followed by the offeree in order to make a valid acceptance. So referring back to our question, what is subject to contract? Subject to contract is an example of variety of other phrases included in a contract. So we have other examples such as without prejudice, a formal agreement would be prepared and executed. So these kind of statements often make the validity of a contract becomes questionable. So the issue here is, does this statement render the contract to be valid or not? So in this question, there are two views, which is the first one is there is no binding contract. Why? Because the court will assume those words so as to postpone the liability until further document is signed. While another one is there is a binding contract because the execution and signing of the document is a mere formality. So to further explain about the first one, we can take a look into the case of Kamah Theatre Sendirian Berhad and Tan Lee Soon 1994. So the facts of the case is both parties entered into an agreement for the sale of certain lands, but the agreement was made by using a letter, and in that letter it was written, the sale and purchase agreement shall incorporate all the terms and conditions herein and other usual terms and conditions, and shall be signed on or before 18 March 1989, or otherwise the deposit would be refunded to the defendant. So the issue in this case is whether the letter that have the statement made above amounted to a valid contract. So the court held that there was no valid contract between both parties. Why? Because the contract was to be made when both parties approve of all the terms and conditions and sign the formal contract. Therefore, the letter was considered to be a part of the negotiations of the agreement. So another case that we can take a look into is Diamond Development, and for this case, I will pass it to Q for further explanation.
Okay, thank you, Ungku. So, hello everyone. I am Nakyudin Abdul Halim, and I will be presenting on Diamond Development Sendirian Berhad case. So, fact of the case: the respondent, which in this case is a buyer, wanted to buy a house and went to see developers. In this case, is the appellant, and the respondent paid a booking fee of $700 and both parties sign a pro forma. So, according to the pro forma, the price that both parties agreed on was $26,000. But the appellants, which is the developer, increased the price to $35,100 due to amendments to building plans and increases of material and production costs. So, the respondent disagreed. Appellant stated that if respondent did not pay the deposit based on increased price, his booking would be cancelled and the booking fees of $700 would be refunded. So the respondent brought the case to the High Court, and the High Court judges gave decision on the favor of the respondent, and the head of the court was the appellants had no right to change the price stated in the booking pro forma because it is a firm contract. So for the next slide, I will give it to Sulaiman. So Sulaiman, take it.
Thank you very much to both Unku and Nakyu for such a clear and concise explanation regarding on the view of the contract is mine if there's no binding contract, if there is a statement of subject contract and etc. So I will explain on second view, which stated that such statement like subject to contract and etc. Is a mere formality. So let us take a look into this case. Prism Leisure Sdn Bhd versus Lumut Marine Resort Berhad 2002 Volume 5 CLJ 391. So what are the facts of the case? The first fact of this case is that the plaintiff, in this case Prism Leisure, had entered into an agreement with the defendant to maintain the defendant's resort, and the letter of offer had been sent on 4th of October 1994, which contained several terms that the plaintiff must fulfill and subject to further agreement. And the offer had been accepted by the plaintiff the day after the letter of offer was sent. However, after several months maintaining the defendant's resort, some issues had arisen, and the plaintiff was seized from his duty to maintain the resort. Subsequently, the plaintiff claimed for compensation after months of maintenance, but this claim was denied by the defendant by saying that there was no binding contract between them, as there was no further agreement reached after the first arrangement. So, what was the decision of the court? The court, especially the judge, after analyzing the wording of the contract in this case, concluded that the two parties were at consensus ad idem, and the act of the plaintiff of performing its obligation showed that the further agreement was merely a form of formality of an already valid and binding contract. Next slide. So, to conclude on this subject, the two conflicting views have their own strength in arguments. The first view decided the cases of such matter rather objectively, whereby the inclusion of such statements or phrases like subject to contract and without prejudice, etc., will render the contract to be non-binding, as the liability is postponed until further agreement is made. The second view, however, took the approach of reading the contract as a whole and not only focusing on the terms to decide on whether the contract is valid or not. All in all, both have their merits. But as you can see, on the cases that we have elaborated just now, both views agree that looking at the wording of a contract is crucial to determine the intention of both parties in contract. That's all from us. Thank you very much for listening.